On November 18, 2024, the world found out that 2 underwater communication cables were cut between 4 NATO countries. According to Cinia, a state-run Finnish company that runs the 750-mile Sea Lion 1, the cable experienced a mechanical failure. Cinia's CEO said in a press conference that preliminary evidence suggests the cable was completely cut at a midpoint by an outside force. It's worth noting that Sea Lion 1 is the only direct link between Finland and Central Europe. The second cable that was damaged was a 135-mile cable between Sweden and Lithuania. The telecommunications company Telia Lithuania that uses the cable for its internet traffic stated, "We can confirm that the internet traffic disruption was not caused by equipment failure, but by physical damage to the fiber optic cable." While the foreign ministers of Germany and Finland remain deeply concerned about the severed cables, they stopped short of blaming anyone in particular, while blaming it on hybrid warfare by malicious actors. But why underwater communication cables are so important and why Starlink wouldn't be able to save us? What's the most common way for underwater cables to get damaged? And what kind of evidence points that Russia might be the malicious actor is not what you think. Underwater communication cables were first laid over 150 years ago, when a telegraph cable was installed between England and France. The first transatlantic cable connected London and the United States in 1858. And get this, 10 hours to transmit just 143 words over that telegraph line. Today, underwater infrastructure is the backbone of the internet, and not just for streaming YouTube videos, but for everything else, including trillions of dollars of daily financial transactions. The entire global economy depends on these cables. Modern fiber optics cables are powered by about 20,000 volts from each end, but that's not enough. Every 43 miles or so, a repeater needs to be installed. The job of the repeater is to boost the incoming signal strength in order for the data to travel over long distances. There are currently more than 870,000 miles of underwater cables around the world, which, if we could put them in a straight line, would wrap around the Earth 35 times. The lifespan of these cables is about 25 years. In total, there are more than 600 underwater telecommunication cables which make up the critical backbone of the internet and data transmission around the world. In fact, about 99% of all intercontinental traffic travels across these 600 fiber optic cables sitting on the ocean floor. Neither Starlink nor any other satellite communications constellation can currently replace this capacity. Because if you think of these underwater cables as an oil pipeline, Starlink is just a little gas station. It should be evident that if a large number of these cables were to be damaged in a coordinated attack, it would significantly disrupt all sorts of communications, which could send shock waves throughout not only financial markets, but also energy markets. That's because many underwater cables in Europe carry electricity. But no need to worry. What are the odds of a simultaneous attack on this underwater infrastructure? It's not like anyone's preparing for it, right? Oh wait. The Russian Roskomnadzor did announce that in December 2024, they'll be conducting a routine test of the RUNET by disconnecting it from the global internet. In other news, the 2 affected countries by the damaged underwater cables, Sweden and Finland, are distributing pamphlets to their citizens on how to prepare themselves for potential power cuts, communication outages, and war. But is it possible that the cables were damaged by marine life? Yes, in fact, there have been occurrences of damaged communication cables as a result of a shark bite. The last such occurrence happened over 30 years ago, in the mid-1980s, when a shark bit through a cable near the Canary Islands. In its aftermath, the cable manufacturers responded with better cable armor, and since then there have been no reports of cables being damaged by sea life. What's more likely to damage these underwater cables is human activity. But let's not jump into any conclusions, because there are other explanations. For example, commercial fishing and ship anchors can frequently damage submarine cables in shallow waters. trawling gear and anchors are the main cause of cable failure, but not for the reason that you might think. It's quite rare for cables to be completely severed by anchors. What happens instead is that the armor layer that protects the fiber optics cable gets damaged, and then salt water is what disrupts the actual communications. Repairing these cables is quite costly and requires a ship to be sent to the location to fix the issue. Speaking of repairs, both telecommunication companies that we mentioned earlier are currently getting ready to send in ships to repair the cables, a process that can take a few weeks, depending on the weather. The area where these two cables were severed in the Baltic Sea is pretty shallow, and at one point, both cables are as close as 33 feet from each other. In fact, there is some strong circumstantial evidence that the Chinese-flagged cargo ship Yi Peng 3 was responsible for breaking these two underwater cables by dragging an anchor across the seafloor. Later, it was announced that a Danish Navy warship was shadowing Yi Peng 3, followed by the news that the ship was actually boarded and detained by the Danish Navy. It's worth noting that Yi Peng 3 was sailing back from Russia, and it had a Russian captain. As of the moment of publishing this video, Yi Peng 3 is the prime suspect of intentionally dragging its anchor and damaging the underwater cables, given that the ship was exactly over the Sea Lion 1 cable when the communications stopped working. So what about Russia? Well, here's what we know so far. On November 11, 2024, Nikolai Patrushev, the close aide to President Putin and the former secretary of the Security Council of Russia, stated that the United States and Great Britain are planning to attack underwater fiber optics communication cables in order to create chaos. Patrushev claims that just like the West blew up the Nord Stream oil pipelines in September 2022 to gain economic advantage, damaging these two cables in the Baltic Sea in November 2024 is just a false flag operation. On September 6, 2024, CNN reported on a Russian secret unit whose purpose is to sabotage undersea communications cables. The unit is called General Staff Main Directorate for Deep Sea Research, known as GUGI. This unit uses submarines, surface ships, and naval drones that are deployed worldwide with the aim of sabotaging underwater cables. According to the officials, the US military regularly tracks Russian movements around underwater cables, and only recently they began publicly worrying about Russia's underwater operations. In April 2023, NATO witnessed increased activity of Russian ships over undersea cables in the Baltic Sea, as well as in proximity of wind farms. More recently, a Russian research ship, Yantar, was noticed in the Irish Sea. On November 14, 2024, Yantar sent a clear message to you-know-who, as she briefly turned on her automatic identification system. This made her presence public for a whole 4 minutes, as she was in international waters south of the Isle of Man. It's believed that Russians are unlikely to actually damage underwater cables in that area, and that the mission appears to be more of a strategic signaling. Yantar is officially an auxiliary general oceanographic research vessel, but in reality, it's used by the Russian secret GUGI, since the vessel can deploy deep-diving underwater drones. According to open-source intelligence, Yantar has been operating close to underwater cable installations on multiple occasions, although there is no definitive proof of her engaging in mischievous activities. Finally, what does damaging the underwater cables have to do with Ukraine? You see, back in September of 2024, the US officials stated that sabotage of underwater infrastructure would be viewed as a significant escalation. Any activity that damaged seabed infrastructure, including undersea cables, especially during periods of heightened tensions, risks misunderstandings and misperceptions that could lead to unintended escalation, the US officials told CNN. The US would be especially concerned about damage to our or our allies' critical undersea infrastructure. It's kind of a big coincidence that the two underwater cables in the Baltic Sea were announced to be damaged only 1 day after the Biden administration allowed Ukraine to use American-made missiles, such as ATACMS, to strike deep into Russian territory. Russia had always said that using Western missiles to strike Russia would be escalatory. So was this a response? Who knows, but it appears unlikely since the cable between Sweden and Lithuania was severed on November 17th at 10 a.m. local time, several hours prior to Biden's announcement. But all I can say for sure is that it wasn't two sharks that decided to take a bite out of those cables at the same time.